Guten Erev Shabbos. Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski was the rabbi of Vilna, the Jerusalem of Lithuania, for close to 50 years. He was once taking a relaxing walk with the Ostrovtzer Rebbe, one of the leaders of pre-war Polish Jewry. The story probably took place in the summertime after Tisha B'Av, before Slichas, when people would go on holiday, probably around Parshas Kiseitze, which we read 2 weeks ago. And these two sages were discussing the meaning of Gavra Rabba, how to understand the concept of a great person. One said to the other, Gavra Rabba, a great person, that seems to be a Talmid Chacham, a Torah sage. The text of the Torah says one thing, and with an interpretation, the Talmid Chacham, the rabbinic scholar, can reveal a new level of meaning in the verse, which was not obviously there. I'll give you an example, he says. The Torah says that certain transgressions are liable to punishment by 40 lashes. The Torah says 40, but the Gemara in Makos explains that it's reduced to 39. That's Gavra Rabba, one who can explain a different meaning in the words of Torah. Said the other sage in response, you're right, but you're not completely right. Your evidence is correct, but what makes a Gavra Rabba a great person is that he sees the suffering of another person and tries to lessen it. Even to take away one lash is to lessen the person's suffering. That's the meaning of a Gavra Rabba. In this year that's coming to a close now, we've seen very debilitating effects of the pandemic and what it's had on those of us who, thank God, managed to stay healthy and guard our physical well-being. Nevertheless, the toll on our mental health was considerable. After the first pandemic wave, the Canadian Mental Health Association reported its findings that 38% of the people that they surveyed, adults 18 and up, said that their mental health had declined due to COVID-19. And in that same study, 46% of those surveyed said they were more anxious and worried. And this after the first wave way back in May of 2020. The second study, which was reported a year ago, showed fully 40% of people with declining mental health as a result of the pandemic. Here, Ontario was a leader in Canada with 44%, very nearly every other person reporting a decline in their mental well-being. And this is among the general population. As you can imagine, among those unemployed or with pre-existing mental health concerns, numbers even higher. We can continue, but the news is even more unsettling. This March, half a year ago, Stats Canada released findings that 1 in 5 adults, 20%, reported symptoms in the past 2 weeks when they were surveyed of major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. These are definitely most trying times for all of us, whether we admit it or not, whether we realize it or not. Now, at the same time, the OU, the umbrella organization to which our shul belongs, the Orthodox Union, surveyed members in about 14 different shuls in the course of a year to track their sense of well-being, their coping skills, and their various ways in which COVID affected their members. The findings were introduced this summer in a presentation which was entitled Cushioned by the Blow, which took 4 sample shul communities out of the study and gave examples of why and how being part of a community helped people to cope, kept their physical and mental states of being on a more even keel, and gave them balance, perspective, and hope, even in very challenging and sometimes discouraging times. Entirely as you would expect, being part of a shul community has its benefits in addition to the Kiddush, which we barely had at all this year, and the drashos, which we only had online this year, many, many benefits. Feeling part of a community is of paramount importance in a time when we have had to isolate, to remain separate and distance, curtail our travel, curtail our social lives, even worry about stopping to talk with someone on the sidewalk or in the mall, which was closed most of this year anyway. In short, the connections with others that we took for granted up through February 2020, because they were such a normal and natural and frequent part of our lives, were suddenly drastically reduced to almost nothing. Well, we still had the telephone, and we still had email, and right away we all learned to use Zoom in a hurry. But just to call and to email wasn't enough. We moved much of our social and intellectual interaction online as best we could, thanks to Zoom. We learned, we read and discussed books together, we watched movies together and shared our reactions. We even said l'chaim together, as we continue to do Thursday afternoons at 5 p.m. Sometimes it's just a short check-in to say hello. Sometimes we have surprise guests, which is always nice but we keep connected. Of course, our learning, or most of it, migrated to online. We heard different stories from schools and universities about the various challenges of online learning. Doesn't seem to be for everybody, but thankfully, for the most part, at least it seems that way, we were able to continue our existing schedule of Torah learning and even add a few things. For the most part, we kept together. We never had to worry about snowstorms or parking, which was a plus, especially in difficult winter weather. The main thing, we stayed connected. We also stayed connected to God. We davened together on occasion. Sometimes we said Hallel together, sometimes Slichas. But for the most part, we managed without minyanim. Although some of us missed out on Kaddish or Yortzeit or other important things that are part of community prayer, sometimes the shul was open, sometimes it was closed. But hopefully, those of us who wanted to keep on davening on a consistent basis were able to do so with support and encouragement from the shul. In short, as a community, we held on to one another, we helped, we called, we listened, we talked, we learned, we laughed, we ordered and delivered, we celebrated, we grieved, and we supported one another through this most challenging period in history. We did the best we could with what we had. We accomplished the greatness that the Ostrovtzer and Reb Chaim Ozer were talking about in their walk in the park 100 years ago to lessen the suffering of another person. Our Torah reading immediately before Rosh Hashanah is always Parshat Nitzavim. It's a very short parsha, but even in the years when it's together with Vayelech, it's still brief. Nitzavim means to stand, and we are all standing together before Rosh Hashanah, but really it has a deeper meaning of standing firm and solid in a very grounded way. And in these times, we can appreciate that shade of meaning so much more than in years past because we've had such a need to stand firm and confident and grounded when so much in life seemed uncertain. Midrash Tanchuma explains the use of nitzavim here instead of omdim, not just standing, but firm standing, rooted, unshakableness. Specifically because of all the suffering you've gone through, says that Medrash, that you are still upright and firm. These trials pass over your head, you outlive them all. Rav Hirsch takes it a step further, saying that Moshe is saying to us in this parsha, I'm going eventually to depart, sooner rather than later. Joshua, Yehoshua, that I'm leaving in my place, he will also be gone eventually. The leaders that follow him will have their day. But you, the nation, the people, is perpetual and undying, remaining and continuously inheriting the spirit which Hashem entrusted to us. There will be individuals, it says a few verses later, a man or a woman, a family or a tribe, whose hearts turn away from God, our God. Unfortunately, we know it happened all throughout history, and to our sorrow, it continues to our days. They bless themselves in their hearts, says Ramban, thinking that they will not be affected by doing what they want to do instead of what the Jewish people is doing. But they are wrong. They're mistaken. Akedas Yitzchak imagines the person who turns away from the Jewish people thinking, if I reject everything, maybe I'm immune from the consequences. That's also a mistake that they made. Nechama Leibovich sums up the problem with these words. Man cannot be completely isolated from his surroundings, from the community whose good and whose solemnly undertaken covenant and responsibilities he spurns. Abraham's intercession with God on behalf of the righteous of Sodom illustrates it. But the conclusion to be drawn is just the opposite of that drawn by the unbeliever. He wishes to shake off all responsibility for his deeds. Judaism, on the other hand, demands that the individual take upon himself the responsibility for the community as a whole. When we read the curses at the end of Kisavoy last Shabbos, we said, Tich l'shana v'kil l'seha. We hope that the curses of the past year come to an end with that year. Why not even before the year's end? But we want the blessings to continue. Towards the end of this brief parsha this week, it's all spelled out for us. Heaven and earth I've appointed this day to be witnesses, says the Torah. I've set life and death before you, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life, so that you and your descendants shall live. That's verse 19 of chapter 30. Choose life. We always ask, it's so obvious. Why do we have to be told to choose life? Because we really do have free choice. Under the best of circumstances, we can make that free choice in the light of day. But in the darkness of confusion, disorientation, pandemic, depression, anxiety, the choice may not be so easy or so clear. So we have to train ourselves. We have to repeat it over and over. Remember it well so it becomes our instinct, as it always has been, through the darker periods of Jewish history, we choose life. We choose blessing over curse. We choose community over isolation. We choose hope over despair. We choose learning, support, fellowship over ignorance, anxiety, and loneliness. We choose, and the choice is renewed every day, sometimes several times a day, to stay connected to God and to each other, to our community, to our souls, and to our hearts. In doing this, we lessen the suffering of others. We may not alleviate it altogether. If it were possible to alleviate all suffering, end all misery, the Jews would have figured out by now how to do that. But maybe it takes God to accomplish that through his anointed one, his Mashiach. But for now, when we help lessen the suffering of others, there's no better way to help ourselves than by helping others. That's why we stand, and we continue to stand together through thick and thin, doing what we can, making the best of what we have, concerned and caring about one another, and with prayerful voices uplifted, recognizing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. In the simple merit of that, please God, may we all enjoy a healthy and happy and sweet new year, a Shana Tova Umetuka. Good Shabbos.